Welcome to the Casey Zavaleta podcast. This podcast is for those who are in pursuit of high performance and for those who are interested in living with intentionality. We'll explore the practices, habits, and mindsets that will help you to be better in your personal life and in your professional life. Your time and attention is a gift that I promise not to take for granted. Thank you for being here. Chris Fudge is a personal trainer and strength and conditioning coach who believes that success leaves clues. You'll hear in this episode about how he's constantly running experiments to figure out what works in fitness and in nutrition. With over 15 years and 20,000 one-on-one training hours in the industry, his pattern recognition skills have led his clients to extraordinary results. He has been recognized as a contributor to the industry as a published writer, conference presenter, and educator, not to mention winning multiple awards for personal training. Chris is a national level powerlifting referee, meet director, coach, and Team Canada athlete. He has also created and facilitated coaching courses for fitness professionals from novice to expert. Chris is a passionate father of 2 young boys, and when not dadding, you can likely find him studying and reading about fitness and nutrition or spending time recording his podcast called Project Fitness Podcast. I hope you enjoy this conversation this week with my friend, Chris Fudge.
I've been competing and coaching and reffing and running competitions since about 2009. So I guess that puts me in my 15th year.
Wow.
I've competed at all the levels you can think of, your local level meet, the provincial championships, which in Canada is like your states. National titles, I've won a few of those. I've gone on, competed for Canada internationally, world championships. I've competed in 78 different competitions. I've lifted in 6 different weight classes. I know the sport inside and out, and it's a fun way to exercise in front of people.
78 different competitions, but who's counting?
Yeah,
That's
yeah. I met a gentleman when I started out, and he once told me his goal was to get to 100 competitions. And I said, that sounds like a really good goal. And I adopted the same thing.
Do you think you'll hit it?
Oh, I will.
Good. It sounds like the only thing you're missing is the Olympics. When's that happening?
Well, fun fact for you, the powerlifting was supposed to be a trial sport in the Olympics, in the Beijing Olympics.
Yeah.
And the IOC decided to randomly show up at another country's nationals, Russia, and said, hi, we're here. We want to drug test half your athletes. And more than half refused the drug test. So there's a fail. And then the majority who were drug tested also failed. So the IOC said, until the sport can handle the drug use, we can't bring you into the Olympics, which is a very unfair representation of the sport because they went to Russia.
I was going to say, is that something that you see worldwide? It sounds like it's not.
The drug testing is extremely extensive in North America. I mean, the US and Canada, there's tons of drug testing that happens. At one point in time, they had to know my address of where I worked. They had to know my address where I lived in case they could just come to my house or my work at any time, ask for a urine or a blood sample. The best athletes in Canada are getting drug tested on a monthly basis, in contest, out of contest. Same in the US. The penalties are quite strict, 4-year suspensions, caught twice, you're banned for life. So in these countries, Canada and the US, like it is very well handled. Some other countries where funding is low, they don't do it as much, or places like Russia who have been notorious for cheating in sports, and that's not my opinion. That's obvious. At the last Winter Games, they got popped for mixed curling, using illegal substances in curling, right? So the IOC went to the wrong country, unfortunately. Yeah.
That's really unfortunate. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. You have tons of experience. Obviously, you're an expert in the sport, having done it, having coached it, having reffed it. Can you boil this down for us? What do you think are the top 3 things that make for a good powerlifter?
Powerlifting is boring. It's really boring. So your ability to handle repetition and boredom will allow you to stay in the sport quite long. So what I mean by that is there's only 3 exercises. You squat, you bench, you deadlift. And in those 3 exercises, it's kind of like a partial range, partial squat, partial bench range, right? The deadlift, you just pick it up to your waist. And because you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, is if somebody can tolerate that level of lack of variety, they will do better because their motivation will stay high and their discipline will stay high. Contrast to someone who might come from a sport such as CrossFit, as we were chatting about before, where variety is the name of the game, someone like that would struggle. So you have to have the ability to, first off, just handle kind of the boring same thing day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
That would be one thing. 2 is you have to be able to handle adversity and then move around it. So what I mean by that is if you just do the same thing over and over again at kind of an extreme level, you're going to develop either plateaus or aches and pains or injuries. Now, I've met people in the past who, when they run into this, they stop the sport altogether and they say, you know what, I'm injured. I'm never going to come back from this. And they move on to something else. That's totally fine. But the best of the best, these things happen. And what they do is they learn from them. So I'll give you a prime example. When I started out in the sport, I would do the exercise like squatting 1 time a week. My progress was pretty minimal. And then I got it up to 2 times a week. Progress went up. 3 times, progress went up. 4 times, progress went up. So what was I thinking? Well, more is better.
Yeah.
5 times a week, 6 times a week, squatting every day. Like I took it to those kind of levels to see what would happen. And then eventually my body said, hey, here's the ceiling of what you can tolerate. You went beyond it. So then I was like, oh, okay, I know how much I can handle. Now I need to back off. Contrast to someone who might be like, oh, I got a knee injury. I'm done. I'm retired kind of thing. So the lifters who do really well long-term are the ones who figure out these little things. They get these tweaks, these injuries, and then they adapt to it. So you have to be really adaptable when it comes to the sport because those things are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing that I would suggest is you have to have free time. You have to have a lot of time. I mean, a lot of people are doing 4 and 5 times a week, 2 and 3 hour sessions a day. Wow. So if you can commit to 15 hours a week of training, you can get pretty darn strong, and then you can compete at different levels. So those are kind of like the 3 things that I would lean on the most that could make someone a great powerlifter. Everybody can get stronger. Anyone can get stronger. Some people start strong, some people start weak, but everybody can get stronger. But if you can mitigate injuries, work around them, if you can tolerate boredom, and you also have a lot of free time, you can become a pretty good powerlifter.
Yeah. It's interesting. Those were all mental things. None of that had to do with some like innate ability or anthropometrics even. Would you add in any of those factors to that list too? Or do you think it's primarily just mental? And I guess your life structure with the third one?
Well, I could take a look at 10 random people and tell you who would be better suited for powerlifting versus who wouldn't based on just those physical structures. So an example, large rib cage, broad shoulders, so long collarbones, short humerus, they tend to make really good bench pressers because their range of motion is less. The position they can put their torsos in give them a lot more of a leverage or mechanical advantage to push weight. The structure of bones, so thick wrists, thick elbows, they can usually tolerate more load in exercise like barbells. Big knees, they can tolerate more in a squat. Long arms, deadlift. So those physical attributes, they do play a very large role in the development of strength. But if you get bored easily and you can't tolerate it, doesn't matter how long your arms are, you're not going to want to do the same exercise 3 times a week. If you get injured and right away you're mentally like, I'm done for life, not going to work. And if you can only train 3 hours a week, right, you're not going to progress as much as someone else who could. So definitely the physical attributes play a role. And these are the world champions, by the way. You take someone with the physical attributes that I just mentioned, they have those, and they have those 3 other things. They're the ones that are like, hey, I've been powerlifting for 20 years, and now I'm a world champion. Yeah.
Which of those attributes do you have? All of them?
I don't have free time like I used to.
Yeah, out of 2.
Multiple dinner, right? Yeah. I don't have any physical attributes. I'm average in all areas. I don't have long arms. I don't have short arms. I don't have, short femurs. But I'm a student of the game because when I started with the sport, there wasn't the access to information like there is now. I couldn't just Instagram my favorite lifter and say, hey, how do you do this? And they say, here, try my program. So I would just communicate and talk to people in competition. I'd see competitors in my division or in the other divisions and just ask them a lot of questions. And I was just so curious of all these different pieces of information. I would try them. And, when this would hurt, I'm like, that doesn't work. So I try something else. So I was really kind of just a very curious and interested person when it came to the sport. And I'm a way better coach than a lifter. And I've always kind of said that. So the idea of being able to foresee things in an athlete before they see it, to me, brings me a lot of like excitement and joy. And then I'm like, yeah, you're here. I can take you to here if we do these things there. So I feel very purposeful in the sport that way.
Yeah. Able to be like a leader, a true leader in that way for people.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think it's better now that we can just go to Instagram and, choose the lifter that you look up to, and we could just copy and paste what they're doing and try it for ourselves. Do you think that's a better scenario, or do you think there's something that's valuable about having to figure it out for yourself?
Well, I guess it depends on who you're asking, right? So let's say we're parents and our children want to get into this sport, and they say, "Mom, Dad, I want to do powerlifting. Can you help me?" Well, Mom and Dad can go online and Google a powerlifting program. They could find someone in the area. They could outsource this information in advance to help with the young person, and then all of a sudden they can go and do their training and they can progress and get better. Contrast to the opposite, if you want someone to figure things out themselves, so they have to develop, strategies for adversity, then that's where you wouldn't want them to have access to all that information.
Yeah.
And then here's a third caveat. Let's say I'm in charge of powerlifting. I'm the person who runs the sport all over the world, and I want it to be as big as possible. I want to get the freaks out there. I want to see who is the strongest person. What can the human body really do? So the more information that's available, the more these people are going to come out of the woods. And that's what you've actually seen in probably the last 8 or 9 years with the explosion of social media.
Yeah.
You're also seeing a trajectory of strength that is just ridiculous. So numbers that were hit a decade ago in squat, bench, and dead that would win a world championship, they wouldn't qualify you to go to worlds now. Like the sport has grown that much. And I'll put it in contextual terms for you.
Yeah.
So the super heavyweights, these would be women over 84 kilos, men over 120 kilos plus. So these super heavyweights. The men, 15 years ago, if you could squat 800 pounds, you would be the world champion and no one would touch you. Now, if you don't squat over 1,000, like you're not a world champion. You might not hit the podium. Right?
No way.
Yeah. 10 years ago, we would take like 135 pound female, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if they could deadlift 350 pounds, they might be the best on the planet, maybe 365. Now they're in the low 500s, low 500s, right?
Yeah.
And it's casual now to see an average sized female deadlift 500 pounds at a world championship. Casual.
Right.
Like it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Incredible. And you attribute that to accessibility of information and therefore increased popularity of the sport because of the internet, because of social media. You can see others doing it. Everyone's learning from each other, that kind of thing.
I would weigh it on social media over the internet because the internet's been around since 97, 94, right? Sure. And we weren't seeing the trajectory of strength like this. Mm-hmm. I don't know when Instagram started. I know Facebook was when I was in university in the mid 2000s, but we weren't seeing a trajectory on Facebook. Really, It was when Instagram really blew up, and then TikTok. So people's attention spans were low, blah, blah, blah. That's totally fine, but they could reach out to someone, message someone, watch their videos. And then Instagram also allowed people to start communicating with people differently by buying products from them, putting links in, all that stuff there that wasn't really as accessible with Facebook. So I think Instagram was actually the largest contributor to the growth of the sport.
Wow. Incredible. Yeah, it makes perfect sense though.
And you're seeing it in gyms. It's a common thing in commercial gyms now to see men and women doing barbell lifts, squatting, benching, and deadlifting, where even the biggest companies of gyms, commercial gyms in the world, are now putting in platforms specifically for barbell lifts. Mm-hmm. When You used to, like those things you could never find. You would find like the occasional rack here or there. But now what you're seeing is you're seeing rows upon rows of these cages for people to do barbell lifts. So now it's even being encouraged at the highest level of gyms.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, like the 24-hour fitness that's closest to me here, there are a couple of squat racks and they're always taken, right? It's also the most popular thing in the gym right now, which is really cool to see. And I also see, males and females waiting to use the racks and to do these sort of powerlifting type lifts, which is really cool. It's definitely a big change.
Yeah. Bodybuilding used to be like the main source of commercial gyms. They'd always modify things and develop them around the sport of bodybuilding. Okay, where's the bicep machine? Where's the tricep machine? Where's the deltoid machine, right? They'd have machines for isolated muscle groups because that was, the customer that was coming in. They were trying to sculpt and change their body muscle group by muscle group. Yeah. Then athletic training came into play and you'd see things like turfs and kettlebells, ropes, bands, those things show up. And then now the third piece is now you're seeing the racks where people can do the barbell lifts. And weightlifting is also exploding because of CrossFit would be my argument there.
Yes.
That's what kind of saved weightlifting in the United States.
Okay, I want to stick in powerlifting just a little bit longer. And let's speculate that you have a powerlifting meet that's 6 months away. Can you give me a sense of what your training is going to look like leading up to that meet? Like, what are the phases that you're going to be thinking about? What's your volume going to look like? What's your load going to look like in those 6 months to prep?
So in about 6 months from now, I will be doing a powerlifting meet.
Perfect.
It'll be South Africa. It'll be the Master World Championships. So from now until then, first off is don't lose any strength I currently have.
Okay.
So because I competed a few times already this year, if you stop training, you will detrain and you will lose strength. So I need to do a certain level of maintenance.
Yeah.
So for me, maintaining the strength that I have now would be doing the main lifts 3 times a week. So if I just do the main lifts 3 times a week and I'm doing kind of hypertrophy rep ranges, 5s to 8s, and I only really need to do about 4 sets these days, I can kind of maintain where I am. I'm not going to get weaker. I'm not getting stronger. I'm just going to stay. And then when I start turning things up, what's going to happen is my intensity, that's always going to be the big one that has to go up eventually. But before the intensity goes up, the volume has to go up. So for my volume to go up, for me, and for a lot of people, the easiest way to do it is not necessarily always adding more sets or adding more reps, just add more days.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, I'll start by going from 3 times a week to 4 times a week. And then when I'm training 4 times a week, over time, I will increase the frequency of the lifts. So squatting 2 times a week over 4 training days with benching and deadlifting, I'll take that 2 times, I'll bump it up to 3 times. My bench, I'll go from 3 times a week, I'll bump it up to 4 times a week. My deadlift at 1 time a week, it's bumped up to 2 times. So my big thing is always increase the frequency first, which will then increase the volume.
Sure.
And then we increase the intensity. And I just do it in waves. The waves can easily be done over 4 to 6 week cycles, right? Where everything is really hard around the end, that 6th week, and then it comes back down.
Yeah. And you'll do that until right before the meet. Like, when does your intensity peak? And then when do you back it off to be rested enough for the meet itself?
Usually about 2 weeks out, I kind of already know what I'm capable of hitting in the competition. So I don't test it in training. I can take one exercise and do it for 2 reps and say, okay, if I do this for 2, I know I can do this for 1, right? Now, in the earlier days, you never knew that stuff. I didn't know that stuff. So we would just send it. It's like, send it Saturday, right? Let's just see what we can do on it Saturday, just randomly. But with the years of experience, I can watch a video of me lifting. I can watch the speed of it. And I can say, based on the speed of this with this weight here, I'm good for X on this coming day. As long as everything else is normal, right? My body weight stays normal, my sleep's about the same, and so forth. I also know that when a certain weight, say 90% of my max, goes slower than it normally does, I can say, I'm either overtraining or my true 1RM isn't what I thought it was. And as a coach, when you watch the same people lift time and time again, you get that eye. So if I was working with you for months on months end, I would know how fast 75% moves for you and how fast it should move. Because your 75% is going to be different than my 75% based on speed. Not everybody moves the weight the exact same. And there's a lot of units you can use out there, like Tendo units and stuff to track bar speed work. And I've experimented with them, and I found that they're really good for an individual who knows their speed, but they're quite poor when you're trying to use them as an average for other people.
Yeah. Okay. Makes
An
sense.
example would say 1.2 seconds is your ideal speed for a descent to an ascent in a squat. So that's like the research at 1.2. So if you timed it, that's what it should be, right? Well, you know what? If you are an explosive individual, you got a high vertical jump, you're quick off the blocks, right? You don't really have a lot of endurance, but you're really explosive. You might be at that speed or faster, right? And then all of a sudden, when yours goes to 1.4, you've got no more give, and your body stops. Contrast to someone who might not have that same speed. Their 1RM might be at a speed of about 2.2, so twice as slow almost, but they have a grind ability, right? So you can't look at the same two people and give them the same metric of speed. The person in front of you is going to be individual. Powerlifting is not 100-meter sprinting, right? Some people are really good at grinding and some people are not, and they can still both move big weights.
Yeah, cool. Have you ever surprised yourself at a meet and lifted way more than you thought you were going to?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We've just, it depends on where we are in the meets, and if you're jockeying to beat someone or not beat someone. I've been in situations before where we've got nothing to lose, you throw it on and you hope things will happen. And sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. Like you really need to work. Yeah. But I can speak upon other people. And when I work with other people, they may not know their ceiling or their true capacity, and they may have mental blocks. I don't have many mental blocks. I kind of have an idea of like, can I lift that? Is it going to be hard and hurt, or is it going to be easy? And sometimes I've been like, I have to lift this to get a total I'm aiming for or whatever. And I'll go into it being like, I know I can lift it and I really don't want to because it's going to hurt. It might be really slow. I might lose technique. And I know that. But some other people will not know. So I had one gentleman before, and we were trying to qualify him for the highest level, the national level. So to qualify, he had to hit a certain total of all 3 lifts added up. He had 3 attempts at each one, squat, bench, dead, and he missed his 3rd squat, which put him way out of position. I'm like, you're not going to be able to make up for it elsewhere. So it came down to the deadlift, and for his 3rd attempt deadlift, I put the difference on the bar that he would need. And this was 65 pounds more than he's ever lifted.
Oh my gosh.
And that is a ton of weight on a deadlift, a ton of weight, where you can't just will it. You know what I mean? Like you either have the ability to or you don't. I didn't tell him. And I just said to him, I said, if you go lift that right now, you're going to nationals. So there it is, right? So he went out not knowing what the weight was.
You didn't even tell him the number. Was that on purpose?
That was my thought process, was if he knew how much he had to lift, the lift would be done before he attempted it. And he went out and he set up, took a big breath, bent down, put his hands on the bar, and he stood up quite easy with it. He stood all the way up, and he even had a look on his face of shock. They gave him the command to put it down. He put the bar down. He looked over at the lights. He got the lights that the lift was good. He looked at me. I waved him off. I'm like, get off. It's like solidified that it was a good lift. I'm like, just get off the platform. Come here. And he never lifted that weight for 2 years. Like he couldn't do it again. He had the physical ability to do it, but he was someone who had a mental block. But we didn't even know. We never even went to that level before, Yeah. So that was a rare situation, and sometimes it can happen if you don't know what your true potential or ability is. And you'll see that in more novice new lifters than more experienced lifters who've been around for a while.
Yeah. Wow. Wild. It is interesting though, because when you have your range in your head, like this is around what my deadlift is, or this is around what my bench is. Once you start creeping up to that number, there is something that happens mentally where you're like, oh, this is going to be hard, or, oh, I'm really pushing it here. There starts to be those thoughts in your head that I can only imagine if you're competing. I've never competed at anything having to do with fitness, but I imagine in a competition, those are just amplified, right? You're on the platform, all this pressure. So that's a fascinating element to things that I didn't necessarily think about.
I like those personally, like those types of situations. That's where I tend to do best. It's like, hey, you do this, you move on, kind of thing. More like a performance. I rarely PR in the gym. It's always on the platform. Sometimes I'm in the gym and someone's like, hey, could you lift that? I'm like, I could lift that. And I'm like, show me, I'm like, I actually can't lift it right now. Seriously, I'll be like, you put me third attempt, have to hit this to move up to win or whatever, I can lift it. But if it's right now and nothing's on the line, I actually can't. I can't do it. If I do, I have to like go to that point. I'm like, oh, it's gonna hurt. It's not gonna feel good.
Yeah, what is that? What's that block? Or is it the stakes are high enough that you
Probably just don't want to do it.
right? It's just gonna be that hard. No
If it's in
point.
the gym, I mean, I probably won't because I mean, I like to think that you only have so many max lifts in your body until
Mm,
something snaps or your time is done, right? So,
yeah.
like if I max out during the year at this stage, I only max out maybe 3 times a year, 2 times a year. That's it. And then what ends up happening is the week after, like my body is not ready to do that again. Like,
Your shot.
yeah, I'm pretty shot. It takes me a while to get kind of back up to it.
The system, muscles, or mentally, or all.
Probably all three.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's the same as like a massive traumatic experience, but if you think of traumatic experiences where there's a lot of adrenaline, right? A big adrenaline dump, right? A huge dopamine afterwards, like that type of scenario. If I get that in a competition, like it takes me a while to come down. Like even the night after a competition, I don't sleep. Like I'm in my bed and like my nervous system, everything is just going. So I don't think I can just randomly be able to do that. I think some people might be able to. It just I know I can't.
Yeah, it's just a good reminder also for those that are maybe, maxing out or lifting to failure often in the gym. I kind of like that idea of kind of like a tally, right? You only have a certain number of actual max attempts within you. And so, yeah, are you using them strategically, I guess? Like, why? What would be the point of maxing out every time, whatever it is?
The sport is about your total, which means you add up all three and you get your score.
Right.
So there's a difference between maxing out and the sport. I mentioned before I don't max out in the gym, and most of my PRs are done on the platform. However, the biggest deadlift that I ever did was not on the platform. It was actually in the gym.
Interesting.
And then I went to the nationals shortly afterwards. So I've got that number in my head. I'm like, I can lift this. I've lifted this before. I can lift it now if I have to. And because it's competition, I could probably put another 20 pounds on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But on that day, I didn't have to lift that to beat someone else. I actually had to lift less, and I would tie the same total as the other individual. But because I was a little bit lighter, I would win based on body weight. So from a strategic
way within a weight class?
yeah.
No way. I didn't know that.
The weight class, one of you could weigh, like I'll tell you exactly, the weight class was 83 kilos.
Yeah.
And on that day, I was like 82.1, and my competitor was 82.4.
Oh, wow.
Right? So
yeah,
he deadlifted his last deadlift and he lifted it. So I didn't need over 600 to beat him. I needed, it was 589 to tie him. So there was no point of me putting on more unless I just wanted the number. But on that day, I was competing in the sport. I'm like, I want a medal. So to get the color medal I want, I don't need more weight. I'm going to put on exactly what I need to tie this individual and beat them on body weight.
Sure. So
you can compete in the sport, that way, or you can just send it on everything. And
right.
People do that.
Right. It's cool to hear you talk about the meat and the sport part of it, because I know the strategy is something that you love as a coach and something that you find interesting and exciting. Do you have like a story about one time where you felt like your strategy as a coach made the difference for the lifter?
Yeah. I love the strategy aspect of it because the sport is still competition, and whoever is the strongest doesn't always win. It's quite frequently always what happens. So what ends up happening is you just have to have the better total than someone else. So when I'm coaching people and I'm coaching them against other people, I always try to make sure I know where their competition's strengths and weaknesses are, and then try to use it to our advantage and against them in their disadvantage. So I'm a referee, and I became a referee to be a better lifter. I wanted to know the rules, the ins and outs. Kobe Bryant did this. Kobe Bryant put a book out after he retired, and he talked about certain spots on the floor where the officials can't see his hands. And what he would do is he would go to those spots and be like, okay, there's 3 officials here. They can't see my left hand. I can hold my defender with my left hand, and the referee can't see it, and I can do a move. And I remember reading that, and I was like, That's smart. So I wanted to, do a similar thing with the sport of powerlifting. So I had to understand the rules and learn the rules. So example is in the deadlift, the bar has to, once you grab and you start pulling, it has to go all the way up. It can't at any point go down and then back up.
Yeah.
So that is a red light. You get what's called a blue card for what's called hitching or up and down motion. If I have a client who's competing against someone and I watch their videos online, social media lets you see all this stuff now, and now you get to see all their training. And I notice in their gym, they tend to do a little bit of hitching, right? So what I might do at the competition is I might be looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I see it and the referees don't see it, I will let them know. So I will say, that there's hitching on that one there. I'd like to challenge the call and then make sure you're watching it. So what will happen is the lifter's going to get 3 attempts. And if the referees are now looking for it, I've been in a situation before, actually with my wife, who is an extremely good power lifter, and she competed and then took a break to have our babies and stuff. And she had the babies. I was partially part of it. But then she came back to the sport, and the sport had really grown over the time that she was away. And not a lot of people knew about her abilities. So we're going to a provincial championship. No one really knows what my wife can lift, and I know what she can lift. And there was a favored lifter to probably win the championships. And what happened from a strategic standpoint was I put the numbers in for my wife lower than what she was actually going to lift. Then at the very last minute, I would change the numbers. You can do this from a strategy perspective. I would change the numbers, and then all of a sudden she goes down and she lifts something really big. But you go in the order of squat, bench, then deadlift. So we put the benches and the deadlift super low. And then just before the last attempt, we'd switch them, and then she'd lift. But the competitor wasn't seeing this. There's a scoreboard, and the number one person was ahead of everyone and thought she was going to be fine. Last second, we switched that last deadlift. All of a sudden, the person who's in the lead the whole competition is now in second place. And that rattled her. Because for the last 4 hours and 30 minutes, she thought she was going to win the championship. And then this one little adjustment there, it rattled her. She missed her lifts. My wife hit hers. Championship. So there's how you can use strategy sometimes in your advantage.
Yeah. When we think of a power lift, we're going to think of like your clean or more the Olympic lifts, right? Why the heck is it called powerlifting?
I don't know why it's called powerlifting, but power is related to, force times mass and speed. Like that's what you're looking for. That's what power is. And weightlifters do that. So weightlifters should be called powerlifters. Yeah. And powerlifters should be called weightlifters because you can be really good at powerlifting and lift a weight really slow, but finish that. So I don't know who came up with the titles, but they should really have a conversation with each other and then go backwards.
You said that the everyday lifter should have these exercises within their training program. Can you give us a sense of why and what someone can learn from powerlifting? What are the nuggets that we can take from powerlifting into our own everyday fitness routines?
The purity of a barbell, right? The barbell there's no gray in it. It's black and white. You lifted it or you didn't lift it. That's it. Machine, you can lift it halfway and then come back down. You're in a machine, you're safe, you're good. But with a barbell, you got to pay attention, right? And you have to push into it. And when you accomplish a lift with a barbell, okay, there's a little bit something more to it. You're usually loading the skeleton with more weight because it's a long apparatus that you can bilaterally load. You can have both legs and both arms at the same time, so your body can handle more weight. So from a muscle mass and a bone density perspective, it can be very beneficial for someone there. Second reason is it's so accessible now. You don't actually have to have a lot of mobility to do it, contrast to weightlifting. If you can't put your arms overhead, you can't go in shoulder flexion, if you don't have good T-spine mobility, if your ankles don't work really good, right? Then you don't jump into weightlifting. But that doesn't necessarily mean just stick to machines either. So the barbells are kind of a partial range, but still allow you to load your system. And then the stronger people are, usually they're more useful and harder to kill. So it does give you that from a longevity perspective. If you do it like anything, if you do it wrong, it's going to wreck you. If you do it right, it's going to progress you.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your stance on technique. And the reason that I'm interested in this is because when I think back to when I, very, very first started in fitness, I had no idea what technique was. I didn't know how to brace. I didn't know how to breathe. And then there were a cascade of things that resulted from that. And I don't think that was optimal. But then I learned a lot about fitness and a lot about movement patterns, and I swung towards the everything must look perfect realm. And so I was very analytical, and I probably wasn't pushing weight as much as I could have or pushing performance as much as I could have because I wanted everything to look exactly right. And I wanted technique to be as perfect as it could get, right? There's no perfect technique, but I swung way towards that side. I'm interested in all your years of experience, in powerlifting, but also, you've trained everyday people, you've been in the gym forever. Like, what's your stance on technique? How much should people be focusing on it? And at what point, on this spectrum, at what point is it okay maybe to let it go a little bit, to push more weight or to perform a little better?
That's a great question. And I think it needs to be answered for a lot of people. So my perspective in the starting days, it was just get the weight up. Everything else will figure itself out afterwards, right? And when you're young and you're robust, you can't be hurt. You can have that process, but only for so long until something happens. And then you learn from it, right? I was lucky enough that in my earlier days, I got to talk to so many different people in the sport at competitions. And what I found was the people with really good technique, they didn't get injured. They were the ones who were like, oh, I've been powerlifting for 20 years. 20 years, the last 5 people I talked to, they said that, like, if you go for 10 years, something will break eventually. How are you doing it for 20 years? And you watch the movement patterns, the way these people work and the way they move, and you're like, oh, technique is actually important. If you round your back enough, the back will say, listen, I can't round anymore. You just snapped me up. And then you can't get stronger if you're injured, right? Now, from a technical perspective, you can actually get the bar off the ground and, like, in the deadlift faster and easier, but you're now not in a position to lock it out with the same level of easiness. Yes. So it's easier at one part, but it's harder at the other.
Yeah,
your ceiling of potential becomes lower because whatever you do regularly, you adapt to. Mm-hmm. So if you start with bad form, you'll adapt with that bad form, meaning you will get stronger. The body will adapt and say, okay, this is how I move things. But because you're going to be doing that, you're going to have your risk of tweaking things a lot higher. And you're not going to be able to strengthen the tissues that you need to properly, that your ceiling of your maximal potential is now lower. So the way I handle this stuff here is I always put the emphasis on the athlete. Do you want to lift more weight? When they always say yes, I say, here's the standards that we are going to adhere to for technique. These standards are going to meet the rules of the sport, and they're going to keep you safe. As long as you meet these 2 things, I will let you have more weight on the bar. We're going to put more weight on the bar every time. When you cannot maintain these standards, we must reduce the weight until you can own those standards. And guess what happens? They get stronger under those standards. And then their ceiling of potential is now much higher. So that's how I go when it comes to technique. And one of my the best compliments I ever got as a coach, and I've had it multiple times, is when someone says, your athletes have really good form. I like hearing that so much more than things like, hey, they're really strong, but oh, that back, right? I don't want to hear that. I'm big on technique.
And you think that thought process, everyday people in the gym can take that and apply it to their lifts as well, even if they're not competing in powerlifting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on what your training goal is. I mean, it's the same thing for aesthetics. If you want to change look on your body, if you want to change your deltoids in your shoulder, technique in deltoid training means I'm going to isolate one section of the deltoid, the anterior, the medial, the rear, whatever I want. I'm going to isolate it and make only that muscle do the work. And if I can do that, every rep that I do, 100% of the emphasis is going to go on what I want to change. That's what technique is. If I throw technique out the window, I'm just moving weight. Yeah. So bodybuilding has technique. Kettlebells, what happens when you swing a kettlebell with good technique? You use the least amount of energy possible to move the object, right? Bodybuilding is kind of the opposite. Let's use the most amount of energy possible to isolate one muscle group at a time. So bells, barbells, aesthetics, it's all the same. Your technique will lead to the result you want if it's the appropriate technique for what you're trying to get.
Love that. Yes. Love that thought process. I saw on social media that you were doing cold plunges, ice baths in your backyard. Was it once a day for a month this past winter?
Well, is that right? Yes, it was every day for the month of January. Yeah. Okay. every January, the family here, we started adopting, we called it January Blanuary, where we choose to do something uncomfortable every day for the month. Now, some people, they're not fans of New Year's resolutions and stuff. Hey, I'm all for anytime somebody wants to better themselves, whether it's January, March, December, I don't care. My first time in the gym was in January. So I'm a New Year's resolution kind of person. It was just about 20 years ago, right? So I'm all for it. So I like January. You know, you kind of pollute yourself in December anyway. Most of us do. We stay up late. We do a little bit more partying. We try all those eggnogs, different food. Mm-hmm. So what I did in 1 January was being aware of the benefits of cold exposure from a health perspective. I said, I'm just going to do a cold shower. So the missus and I, we agreed for the whole month, no hot water. We had cold showers.
The whole shower was cold?
Yeah. And I don't mean like the James Bond 007, you have a hot shower and then you turn it on cold for those last 30 seconds. No. The water never got warm. It was turned on just enough that water would come out and would be freezing. And that's how we had our showers every day for the month of January. So she did it, I did it. And then the following year, she got a cold plunge from me as a gift. And I said, awesome, let's do this. So we set our BAMs, our bare ass minimums, what we were going to do on a daily basis for the month of January. And it was outside. I brought it inside for 1 week. It was like minus 20 and it literally froze. So I'd melt it, dump it, bring it inside, set up my basement, add water, add a whole bunch of ice to it. But no, we did it every month for the month of January. Yeah, It sucked.
Yeah. So the reason that you did it is just the act of doing something hard every day. Like, tell me about why you did that for the month.
I live a very comfortable life. I think a lot of us do. And the more comfortable you get, the easier life gets. But really, like you stop growing, you stop progressing. And being a dad of 2 kids, it's hard. It's going to be hard to raise kids in this era where everything is so easy. Yeah. So you want the best for them, but you also want them to struggle and go through some difficult times. Mm-hmm. And if you ever want your children to do anything, there's 3 things you can do that would lead them in that direction. And it's lead by example, lead by example, and lead by example. So if my kids see me getting into an ice bucket and hanging out there for 3 minutes a day, when I tell them to do something uncomfortable, they're not going to be like, well, you never do that. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big thing. And the benefits that come with cold exposure, I'm a very alert person first thing in the morning. But if I wasn't, that's where I could get it from cold exposure, right? Yeah. Dopamine hit that you get afterwards. I get a lot of dopamine anyway in my morning routine. That's already pretty good. But midday, energy's going down low. If I were to do one of the cold plunges midday, once I got out, hey, I feel a little bit more alert and a little bit better. So I was using it for purposes like that. And that's why we do the cold plunge. Yeah, we did other things too. We had like no tech. We had no TV for the whole month. The family, so the kids, mom and dad, no TV. We switched it with reading time, right? And leaders are readers. So it was kind of cool to see like a 7-year-old and 9-year-old mom and dad. We all got books for Christmas. We're sitting down in the living room in the evening, and it's reading time, right? Yeah. Which would be so weird to me as a kid. It just wasn't something in our household. But in my household now, I get to kind of curate how I want it to look. So we do that. And now they just think it's normal. They think it's normal to read all the time. So my kids read a ton, and they're smarter at 7, 9 than I feel like I was at 14 or 15 years old. And I just think because we're trying to curate these environments, and they follow suit. Yeah.
Were there ever any moments where you had to push past mental barriers, or you were saying to yourself, I don't want to do this today. Like, I do not want to get into the ice bucket every day.
Like every day.
What is that? What did that look like for you?
Okay. So the idea of being comfortable, the complete opposite is cold. I like heat. That's where I should be. So I said, what's the opposite of comfort? It's going to be cold, hence the cold showers and the cold plunges. But then I started trying to make it more comfortable. So what would I do? Okay, I'm gonna get really hot before I go in. So maybe I'll do a little bit of exercise. Maybe I'll sit by the fire and I'll go in. So I always thought that's added like 15 minutes. Then it was, I'm going to have like my favorite song on. So I'll play my favorite song. Then I'll jump in. And I started like realizing like, I'm trying to make something that's uncomfortable comfortable. It's defeating the entire purpose. So what I did instead was, I'm not going to rely on any of those things there to make it feel like it's going to be easier. I just
Mhm.
said, when it's time to go, whoop, shirt off, boom, 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 socks off, get in, hit the timer, get out. So I tried not to think too much. I got rid of having my favorite song. I got rid of
Yeah.
like the pre-warmth, procedure. And the fact that I was doing it, Maggie was doing it with me. Sometimes the boys would cheer us on. Like it was a lot easier when you had other people, but I just had to like abandon that. My mind was trying to play tricks and say, oh, it'll be easier if you have this going on instead. No, no, no. Discipline over motivation all the way.
Nice. Nice. Is it correct to say that you eat mostly animal products? Meats, eggs, butter,
Yeah.
dairy,
Yeah. Some
and
organs. Yeah.
yes,
We
organ
do, we do,
meats.
we do fruit. I do a little bit of fruit as well, but that's pretty much it.
Okay. It's interesting. Back like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago when I did like a nutritional therapy course, one of the key takeaways from that was the importance of having a wide variety of foods, and especially like fruits and vegetables in your diet to make sure you're getting all the micronutrients. How do you get all the micronutrients that you need from a diet that's mostly animal products?
Well, first thing you do is you test it. So how would you test that, right? People may have claims or say things, and I always say, well, how do you know? Do you do lab work? Do you do vitamin mineral panel? Have you done any gut testing? Like those are things to really tell. So
Yeah.
for me, I said, well, if I want to try eating a certain way, why don't I test it? And that's exactly what I did. I did blood work, then I went to an animal based or carnivore 100% for 66 days, and then I did my blood work again. Hey, guess what? I don't have scurvy. All of a sudden you realize that the amount of vitamin C that's recommended is actually the amount that's recommended to treat scurvy, not the amount you need to live. Well, that's interesting. Well, why would the RDA be certain amounts of vitamin C? Well, if I want to put on my tinfoil hat, there's a lot of money to be made with vitamin C. Right? Vitamin C is a supplement, vitamin C added to so many different things. What really happens when your vitamin C levels get too low? Well, your nails are going to be more brittle. You're not going to clot when you bleed anymore. Your joints are going to hurt. So my naturopath was telling me these are the things that are going to happen. And I said, okay, but they're not happening and my vitamin C levels are lower than what you think. So I'm testing this with no ill effects. Okay, great. Let's look at all the other vitamin minerals that I have. I'm not deficient in anything. Well, how is that possible? Well, when you eat an animal that eats other things, you get it. So people aren't aware vitamin C is found in liver, right? Vitamin D is extremely high in eggs, and it's in the yolk of eggs. So in our fitness industry, everyone's scared of the eggs, right? They're scared of the yolk, right? Because of the fat that's in there. I eat 6 eggs a day. So if I'm putting down, 40 some eggs a week, guess what my vitamin D levels show? Living in Canada, where everyone is deficient, mine are actually above average. Awesome. Oh, that's good to know. So I just really bought into the idea of learning and understanding what do these labs mean? What should I be getting tested on? Not your general panel. So when I go to my naturopath, and she's an awesome woman, because I told her I want to do these weird things, she's like, listen, I'll help you get your tests. However, you got to promise it if things go bad. I was like, yeah, no problem. I'll totally, that's what I want to do too.
Right.
So I'd say, can I get all these tests? She's like, sure, I'm going to suggest you get these on top of it. No problem. So all of a sudden, like, this is an $800 lab test. I'm testing everything, right?
Yeah.
And then I eat a certain way, and then everything seems to be totally fine. And then my wife started doing it. And now my kids kind of eat that way as well. And we're good. Sometimes you just have to stop saying or following what someone else says. I'll give you a prime example. In my field, working with people with weight loss in the early days, I would follow the recommendations from Canada's food guide, which made perfect sense. Okay, so many grains, so many vegetables, no processed meat, lower your sugar, alcohol content, minimize your red meat. So when the average person would come in to see me and I'd say, hey, this is what healthy eating looks like, try to follow this. They would try to follow that, usually high vegetables, maybe lower carbohydrate. They would start seeing like their weight go down, but they always say the same things. Chris, I'm really bloated. I got a lot of gas. I'm bulking a lot, right? And I'd say, well, I guess it's normal because it's what I was told to tell you to eat. So just kind of keep eating it. Then they'd start eating less vegetables and they'd say, hey, all that bloating and stuff went away. Okay. But then if they're eating less vegetables, they start eating more of other things. And the ones who ate more of animal products, their health went like this. And the ones who ate more processed foods or carbohydrates, their health went like that. And I was the same way. I was like, I always bloat off all these vegetables. I get digestive stresses and stuff. And I just yanked them out, right? And now I can eat a large meal and I don't bloat. My bowel movements are more regular than ever. My energy is like this all day long. It's not these peaks and lows. And I feel really good. So that's kind of the other side of it as well.
I always appreciate your willingness to experiment and then how evidence-based you are. I think there is so much to learn from that, because especially in nutrition, man, I don't know what it is about nutrition, but people just like latch on to the things that they hear and then they become part of their belief system about how they should eat without any real evidence for it, or maybe evidence within a Netflix documentary as enough for them, right? They haven't like tried it on themselves and really been thoughtful about the impacts that it's having, and am I having symptoms and what am I seeing? So I always appreciate hearing you talk about that, because I think it's...
And if she tested and it didn't work, at least she'd know.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. Final thing I just want to touch on quickly. You mentioned at the beginning how different CrossFit is from powerlifting, yet you've been doing CrossFit lately and you did the open, I saw. So tell me about that experience and, doing something that's such a high variety and what do you call it? Exercise racing. Like it's so different than training for powerlifting.
I didn't know until I was in a competition. So I was going to CrossFit, my wife Maggie started doing CrossFit and she was doing very well in the early days. And then I would go for like a date day. I'd go once a week and do a CrossFit class with her. That was fun. And then all of a sudden I said, this is really good for health. This is like a missing piece of my own physical fitness, the cardiovascular components of it and the variety of movements. So I said, I'm going to start doing this too. I said, I want to do it all. I like to exercise. And then I signed up for a competition and I was in the competition and I was looking around and I said, oh my God, this is exercise racing. Everyone here is exercising and whoever can do it the fastest is the winner. And I'm like, awesome. Let's go. Let's go as fast as we can. And it was this crazy rush that you get because you have to go so far outside of your comfort zone. And when there's people cheering and stuff, like it makes you work 10 times harder than you will solo. And I also realized quickly that in a gym setting, a commercial gym setting, when we're training our clients and stuff, it's all about anti-compensation. Don't compensate. Lift this way, boom, boom, boom. Make the muscle do the work. Powerlifting, control. Don't get sporadic. Sit down and rest. Take your 3 minutes. Your nervous system needs it, right? Yep. And then I learned that CrossFit was kind of the opposite.
It is the opposite.
How chaotic can you get without breaking, right? And how can you compensate a movement that allows you to move the weight the fastest or the most amount of times? We were doing a workout one day. It was in my earlier days with a dumbbell overhead. So dumbbell overhead, step back, alternating lunge. So I'm going second, my wife's going first, and I'm watching her do it. And I look over at some other people doing it, and I'm like, they're bending their wrist this way, which takes the load of the dumbbell and puts it closer to the center of mass of the individual. What they're also doing is they're taking a shorter stride in their lunge, which then takes the center of mass and compacts it even more. So it becomes more efficient. So I'm watching this, and then all of a sudden it's my turn to go, and I just try that little technique, little small difference. Guess what? It's easier. It's like the opposite of what we would teach in personal training. Don't make instead of making the exercise harder, make it easier. Then you can do more repetition. So all of a sudden it was, how do you make your body as efficient as possible to do these movements? Then you can do more repetitions. So I thought it was just kind of cool to look at workouts and look at exercise and strategize. It just makes it a little more fun.
It's a completely different approach. The gym that I go to is not a CrossFit gym, but I would call it CrossFit adjacent. And similarly, the style of training and the way to like approach the conditioning pieces is completely different than I ever thought about it in personal training. And I think there are positives and negatives, but what I love is it's just a completely different way to approach fitness. And it's fun to find those things, right? And just like expand our horizons and realize that there are many, many different ways to exercise.
When it comes to health, one of the metrics that's been around for a long time, has been around forever, is cardiorespiratory fitness, cardiovascular health, VO2 max, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a no-brainer that when your VO2 max goes down, your cardiorespiratory fitness goes down. Okay, your likelihood of living a long age goes down with it. Like
Right.
that's a no-brainer. Strong VO2 max, long life. We know that. CrossFit pushes the VO2 max like no other, right? You will do more reps. You will go harder. You will do the cardio machines you don't want to do, right? You'll do all that stuff based on pure pressure, right? And I think that is really good for people. The average person won't push that hard in a solo session or commercial gym setting, the cardio piece. So I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe it's already happening. I haven't heard of it. But where CrossFit or metabolic conditioning workouts eventually becomes prescribed for health from a general physician. I think if you could just say, listen, let me test your VO2 max. Okay, you're low. If we can get it up to even just 10 points here, you're going to be a lot healthier. You're not going to need these drugs. Your blood pressure is going to drop, blah, blah, blah. So here's a facility down the road where they do CrossFit workouts. And that would then help people kind of live longer and better. So that's one of the aspects I really do love about it. And I hope it's just there down the road a lot more.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Casey Zavaleta podcast. If you are organizing an event that's oriented around health and wellness, or you're booking corporate wellness sessions for your company and you're interested in having me come and speak at that event, please reach out at caseyzavaleta.com/contact. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, I would hugely appreciate if you could take 10 seconds and leave a 5-star rating on the show. I would even more hugely appreciate if you could take 30 seconds and leave a quick review on the show. It helps to spread the word to more listeners about the podcast. If you would like to receive notifications about episode drops, or if you're interested in actionable insights related to podcast content, be sure to subscribe to my newsletter. You can do that at caseyzavaleta.com/subscribe. Okay, everyone, that's it from me this week. Thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you back next Wednesday for the next episode of the show.